The French seam. The French seam is used especially for sheer and transparent fabrics. There are some advantages of using the French seam. Firstly, no seam finish is required because no raw edge is exposed. Secondly, a neat appearance is created. And lastly, the extra row of stitching strengthens the seam. However, there are some disadvantages. For example, when heavyweight or highly textured fabrics are used, the seam becomes bulky. Also, the seam is difficult to alter and cannot be let out. It is also time-consuming to construct, and lastly, difficult to sew on curved seams. Here are the construction steps of the French seam. Firstly, you need to place wrong sides of the fabric together. Pin seam with pins at right angles to the edge. Next, you need to machine straight stitch a 1 centimetre seam. So make sure that the edge of the fabric is lined up with the first line on the needle plate. Don't forget to backstitch at the ends. Now trim the seam allowance to a width of 3 millimeters. Now press the seam flat and then open. Just remember to check the iron temperature. Because you use sheer fabrics, it's usually recommended to use a cooler setting, for example, on the silk or wool setting of your iron. You can also turn it over and press on the other side. Turn the fabric over, and next you need to fold the fabric over the 3 millimeter seam. Make sure when you're pinning that the seam line sits at the top. Since this fabric is sheer and has a tendency to move, you may wish to tack along near the stitch line to increase the stability. What I've done here also is I've pressed it. You can see here that I have begun to sew the final row of stitching. To encase the raw edges, this row of stitching needs to be 5 millimeters away from the edge. To achieve this easily, I have moved the needle position to far right, and I am lining up the edge of the presser foot with the edge of the fabric. Remove the tacking and give it a light press. Now open up the seam to the right side and press with the seam also to one side. Just check to see if there is any fringe of raw edges coming out from the seam line. If so, trim them off with a small pair of scissors, taking care not to cut the fabric. As you can see, this is a very neat seam and seam finish, all sewn in the one process.